They're on YouTube, so you can go back and take a look-see.
Okay. I'll do that.
All right, it's 5:07, and it looks like we can keep this a non-BPUD official meeting with the boards. Thank you all for joining. Georgia and I put this meeting together to bring out Kristen from the county to talk about the local coastal hazards program. Is that, did I say it right? Local hazards, coastal hazards program?
It's
Say it for me.
the local coastal program on environmental hazards.
Yes, and there's some addendums and some changes that are coming up. And so Kristen has been running around to all the different communities and giving this. And there's actually a meeting on December 11th. That's a bigger meeting that you can sign up for in the county for those of you. But we get a sneak peek for this community today. And so I guess that's what I got. Georgia, anything else?
No, just thank you for coming out and presenting, Kristen. And I'm looking to be educated.
So maybe we can just start with quick intros. I'm Jeremy Tajarian. I run the planning department, and here with Kristen Drum, who is a senior planner in our long range planning section. And as Kristen mentioned, we are in the process of amending the policies and regulations around environmental hazards in the local coastal program. Local coastal program, if any of you have kind of followed any of the amendments in the past, was originally created back in the early 80s, 1981, 1982, and then was relatively unchanged for, 30 plus years. And finally, in about 2008, I guess, we started some amendments, and Kristen's going to kind of go through a little bit of the history of that, but that went through about an 8-year long process. And eventually, we did a comprehensive update of our local coastal program that was approved by the California Coastal Commission, with the exception of the environmental hazards section or policies and regulations. And with those amendments, our negotiations essentially broke down. And we decided to go ahead with all of the other amendments and then return with the amendments related to environmental hazards. So that's what we're doing now. It's really kind of a follow on from that long comprehensive process that we went through. So Kristen's going to provide you with a kind of overview, and then we'll leave some time for questions and hopefully answers. Do our best at least. And really hoping for a couple of things from tonight. We don't anticipate that you've actually read any of these, although they're all up online, along with a kind of explainer that we've put together and some background about all the public input we received over the 8 years of the LCP amendments. So hopefully that will be helpful to you when you do take a look at it. We wanted to kind of introduce you to those topics, and then as you mentioned, we have a public webinar coming up on the 11th. If any of you are able to come to that, hopefully you'll have a chance to take a look at the amendments before then. And then we're hoping to get written comments by the end of December. So those are really our two asks for tonight. That try to make it to the webinar if you can. Good questions, good comments, and then hopefully get us written comments by the end of December. What we're going to do, this is what we call the public review draft. What we're going to do with that is that once we've got all those comments, we'll put them all together, and then we'll revise the public review draft to create what we call the Planning Commission review draft. And then that's what we're going to bring forward to the Planning Commission. They'll review it before it goes on to the board, and then eventually to the Coastal Commission itself for certification. So we're kind of at the beginning of this process. There's many opportunities for you to continue to weigh in, stay appraised, and subscribe to the website to see as those hearings come up in the future. Really appreciate all of you being here tonight, and hope to give you a good kind of overview of what things are going on, and hopefully pique your interest enough so you actually take a look at the amendments. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen, and maybe Kristen, give us a walk through the presentation.
Yeah. Why isn't this doing? So I'll introduce myself. I'm Kristen Drum with the Senior Planner at the Community Development Agency. And so tonight, I'm briefly going to go over the schedule for the amendments, go over a little bit of the background. You can tell me how knowledgeable you guys are, and then talk about the approach that we are taking for the amendments. And then I'm going to spend a little time to go over the key topic areas for the amendments we're making to both the land use plan and our coastal zoning code. And then we'll talk about next steps, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Why can't I do that? Oh. Okay. Okay, here we go. Sorry for that. Okay, so Jeremy did briefly touch on the schedule, but I just wanted to go over it in more detail. We did release a draft of the amendments. They're on our website back in November. We're meeting with community stakeholders now to introduce the draft, go over the amendments. We're scheduled to meet with more groups later this week. And then next week, we have our community webinar. I understand you have a conflict, but hopefully you can help us promote it and attend if you're available. We will take the comments that we are hearing and revise them and bring them to a planning commission workshop and hearing. At that point, the planning commission will make recommendations on to the board. We'll bring that to the board of supervisors sometime this spring, in April perhaps. And then the board will, after board approval, will submit a version to the Coastal Commission, at which point the Coastal Commission will review the draft for consistency with the Coastal Act, and then they hopefully will certify the amendments. Okay, so I don't know how much you guys are aware of, know how long this has taken. We did start a comprehensive updates to our amendments back in 2008. And the process involved significant community outreach and meetings. At the same time, we were meeting with the Coastal Commission staff throughout the process. We have had several hearings with the Coastal Commission, notably in 2014 and 2016. In 2016, we brought the commission certified a package of amendments on the condition that the county accept various suggested modifications. And meanwhile, the county decided to withdraw the environmental hazard section of those amendments due to various concerns with those issues, to spend more time to work on those issues. And then meanwhile, so we worked with the county, the Coastal Commission, on those unresolved issues. And then in 2018, the Board of Supervisors had a hearing, and they accepted those suggested modifications, and they approved, and then the Coastal Commission finally certified the amendments, and the board made those amendments effective in July 2021. So that's the document that's currently in place, and it's minus these environmental hazards topic. So our approach this time is, rather than a wholesale overhaul of the environmental hazards, we are looking for, we plan on doing a small and focused set of amendments that we think are feasible and realistic, given our conversations that we've been having with Coastal Commission staff. And so we will plan on carrying out these hazard amendments in 2025. At the same time, we'll be bringing forward a separate set of amendments that to implement the housing element. That will also occur in 2025. And then these amendments will then be followed up by a wish list or refinements that we can make to general updates and suggestions, and that will occur in 2026. And then we will have future updates on a 2-year cycle to allow us to make refinements to the amendments. Once we put them into play and see how they work out, we can start making refinements on a continuous schedule. We do this with the development code that we have for the non-coastal areas, and it seems to work well. And so we hope that this phased approach that we're taking is favorable, and it's also realistic, and it's an alternative to the time-consuming and expensive process that we've taken up in the past. Let's skip that. Okay, go back. Okay. So beginning with our land use plan, we have two changes that set the stage for our environmental hazards in the coastal zone. Sorry, here. The first thing we do is we define what coastal hazards are. This is not new. We already know what coastal hazards are. We've added sea level rise as a new hazard. It's not been addressed and is now currently addressed, or it will now be currently addressed. Some of the hazards that are already addressed include shoreline and bluff erosion, liquefaction, earthquake hazards, and wildfire, for example. And a second important change is that we've now included mapping for sea level rise. It's for 3.3 feet of sea level rise inundation. And the LCP, as I said, currently relies only on the FEMA flood maps, which only account for historical flooding and not climate change. So, so currently, a structure located in a FEMA flood zone may only elevate up to the base flood elevation, only up to the base flood elevation. But with this change, a structure located in the area may elevate up to the base flood zone and also plus a freeboard elevation of 3 feet for sea level rise. So another key policy change would promote nature-based adaptation, such as dune enhancement and wetland restoration over shoreline armoring. So this is important because the current LCP only addresses shoreline protection through hard shoreline armoring, such as the use of revetments or seawalls. And we know that studies conducted through CSMART and the Stinson ARC project that nature-based adaptation is a preferred method over armoring because it also not only enhances, but it maximizes coastal resources and promotes public access. And it's also maybe the least environmentally damaging. Okay. So this change may not affect the Bolinas residents per se, but it's important because it's important because the Coastal Commission has recommended this change. This change would allow for homeowners along Tomales Bay to increase to allow for height increases to adapt for sea level rise, and also allow improvements for their underlying bulkheads, which you can see in the picture here. The current policies are very restrictive and limit building heights to 15 feet for those structures, which really limits opportunities to elevate for sea level rise and then repair for their existing bulkheads. The Coastal Commission has requested this change. Many of the project properties along the Tomales Bay shoreline are within the Coastal Commission, what we call their permit authority, which means they take over the permits. We don't do that. And so, the Coastal Commission retains jurisdiction over properties that are over public trust and submerged lands and tidelands. So we are aware that increasing the building heights of these structures may impact views, visual resources, and community character. But we feel that this will need to be weighed against allowing homeowners to raise their homes to protect their assets. And another important change is that another change would apply to areas in Stinson Beach that are in the 100-year floodplain of East Coot Creek. There is a current moratorium in effect that prohibits new development if you are located within the creek's 100-year floodplain. And only very limited construction can occur there. It's limited to repair and maintenance, mostly. So we've made a change that would eliminate this moratorium so homeowners could elevate for elevation for sea level rise, among other things. So we know that water and wastewater systems in the coastal zone can be vulnerable to hazards from climate change. And we know that many coastal communities depend on on-site septic systems and private wells, as we know that many in Bolinas do. We know that increased sea level rise could cause groundwater tables to rise or may cause saltwater intrusion, and rising water tables could also affect some septic systems. So given that, the amendments recommend that water and wastewater treatment facilities, including public and private wells, and public sewer treatment plants, private septic systems, if they are located in vulnerable locations, they should be protected from the long-term effects from sea level rise. And communities should also consider alternative locations for such facilities so that they are in a safer location. And we also know that the coastal zone is subject to catastrophic wildfires. And so the current policies prevent or severely limit defensible space activities and fuel modification activities if they occur in what we call an environmentally sensitive habitat area, or ESHA, or an ESHA buffer. So we've made a change where the proposed amendments still maintain, you still have to do fuel modification activities, and you still have to do defensible space, but, and they still must avoid an ESHA. However, if it is not feasible to stay out of an ESHA, then we allow some flexibility for you to, if you have to go into an ESHA to do these activities, then you must reduce the impacts to coastal resources, which is very important. And because we feel that this change is appropriate because it attempts to strike a balance between wildfire safety while continuing to maintain the objective of the Coastal Act, which is to protect ESHA resources and protect ESHA resources. And so this change still maintains defensible space requirements while allowing for some more flexibility. So switching over to our development code. So a primary change there would allow this change implements the policy that I spoke to earlier. So now we allow the code would allow the elevation of structures to adapt for flooding and sea level rise by modifying height standards for areas that are in the newly mapped, what we call the coastal inundation area, as you can see from the map here. So we have the LCP currently has a maximum height limit of structures to 25 feet. And so in many instances, this height limit would not allow the elevation to accommodate for sea level rise. So if a structure is located in the mapped area, the change would allow an increase in the height from 25 feet up to 30 feet to provide flexibility to accommodate flooding from sea level rise. And so this 5 feet, it includes the base flood elevation plus 3 feet for sea level rise. So there's also a change that would impose a number of conditions onto projects that are approved in areas of hazards that are subject to hazards. So, and it would require applicants to take on many of the risks associated with an approved project. So, for example, that the homeowner or applicant, they must include any assumption of hazardous risk from that project. The condition of the project would prohibit any new armoring to protect that development in the event it becomes threatened by coastal hazards in the future. It includes triggers for future removal or relocation if the approved development is threatened by coastal hazards. And it would also ensure the development does not interfere with public trust resources. And it would require real estate disclosure and recordation of a deed restriction to provide additional notice to future property owners about coastal hazards. So there are several important considerations to keep in mind when you're reading this policy. First is that this language is directly provided by the Coastal Commission staff over the years. When we get comments from the Coastal Commission staff regarding coastal permits, and they always provide language that we should include in conditions of approval. So we've copied that language and put it directly into the amendments. And we haven't made any changes to that language, even though we've gotten several comments from other staff and other stakeholders that there are issues, that they have issues with this language. And we wanted to show as an example of the kinds of comments that we are getting from the Coastal Commission, and what we may expect to get in the future regarding our amendments. So, and so let me see. And a third, we take the viewpoint that these permit conditions are a compromise, that we are allowing homeowners to elevate their home. So at the same time, these conditions may be a compromise because of that allowance that they get the increased height. So therefore, these are maybe an appropriate compromise. But we want to hear from you on the language. Are there changes that should be made? What do you think about it? And we know that there should be changes, but we want to have you take a closer look at it and tell us what you think. So regarding new development, so as you know, or maybe you don't know, but we've had ongoing discussions with the Coastal Commission on how existing development is defined, which has implications on when a shoreline protection device can be approved to protect an existing structure. The current interpretation by the Coastal Commission for an existing structure means a structure that is existing. It's prior to the effective date of the Coastal Act, which is 1977. However, our interpretation of existing structure is at the time an application for a coastal development permit is placed. So the courts are arguing this case, so we shall see how it plays out. But in the meantime, we do have an existing definition of new development in our code. The definition mandates public access must be required for a new development project. So we've taken that definition and modified it to remove the public access component. So what we've done is now define what is new development, which conversely means that we've also have a definition for existing. So I don't know how this will play out. Another change regarding would require development to be sited to avoid coastal hazards to the degree feasible. Current language says development must be sited and designed to minimize risks, and there is no flexibility in that. So we've made a change to the language that would provide more flexibility than the existing language while still honoring the intent of the regulation. And so finally, we've added new language to establish a 1,200 square foot building area limit for development approved, so that we avoid a constitutional taking. While this isn't a frequent occurrence, it does happen. So this new language would give us a standard when it does occur. And it gives us a standard. So, and the 1,200 foot size standard, we've kind of used a statewide a size limit for accessory dwelling unit here, but there's no requirement that says we can't go bigger or smaller. So again, your feedback on what this should be is important. Okay, so In terms of next steps, we do have a webinar next week. If you can't make it, maybe you can tell your friends to come and then help us promote it. We will be taking all the feedback we get. Hopefully you can get your comments by the end of December, and then we're going to revise a draft, bring it to the Planning Commission. Then we have Planning Commission hearings later this winter. We'll bring it to the board in the spring, and hopefully the Coastal Commission will hear it in the summer or fall 2025. So that's all that I have to present. And before we get into Q&A, I did want to highlight our webpage for the hazards amendments. This is a short link that hopefully you can go there and read the amendments if you haven't had a chance. And also, if you have questions and comments, please email me. My email is noted here. Okay, so now we'll just open up the floor if there are any questions.
Thanks, Kristen. You want to stop sharing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably don't need that anymore. Kevin.
Hi, actually, would you mind sharing your screen again? I wanted you to go back to one of your first slides showing the floodplain in Bolinas.
Sure, yeah. All those maps are also available online, by the way, if you want to take a closer look at those.
Let's see. Let me see if I can do
I
this.
think that was the one.
Oh, let me do there. This one?
That's the one. So does that show downtown Bolinas as being inundated? And what's I guess my first question is, what's the timeline are we talking about here? 100 years? Is that 50 years? What
So
is
I
it?
think
3.3 feet sea level
so
rise?
this is based on a couple different things. One is the FEMA maps for the special flood hazard area, which you see hatched. And then the other is our Coast Our Future, which is, statewide projections of 3.3 feet of sea level rise by 2060.
2060. Okay, so more like 35 years.
Yeah.
Which I can't really see a lot of detail on that map, but it looks like downtown Bolinas is underwater. Is that right?
Yeah, it does include downtown up to Brighton Road, and it includes the market, library, community center, gas station, and museum, among other
Important parts of our town. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you can zoom in when you look at the map online. It's probably easier to read than this. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's frightening. A related question would be a couple slides down when you showed the house on Tomales Bay. If you could, well, maybe everybody remembers. So I guess my question is, what is the state's and the county's perspective on maintaining Highway 1? Because if it's one thing if you allow a homeowner to raise her house 5 feet to escape sea level rise, but if Highway 1 is inundated, which appears to be at the same level as that house, what's the point? So what is the state of California stating about their intentions with Highway 1? And what is County of Marin doing? Like the map of Bolinas shows Olima Bolinas Road also in the floodplains. Our school is there. So what is the county's commitment to maintaining these roads in a state of sea level rise?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's excellent. I mean, obviously, what we're dealing with here are land use regulations. It's a set of zoning regulations. So it's really about private property development. The LCP amendments have much less to do, the LCP in general has much less to do with capital improvements, infrastructure development, that kind of thing. The county's position is that the state should maintain Highway 1 and adapt to sea level rise. I don't know that the state cares all that much about what our position is, but we will do what we can to try to put forward what is best for the communities that we serve. And hopefully they will be making long-term plans to be able to adapt to sea level rise. And I think that there's been some activity with that in that respect, but perhaps not as much as we think that there should have been. And in terms of the county's own roads, I mean, I think the Department of Public Works has capital improvement programs. They're certainly looking at different areas that need to be improved to address sea level rise, and that is an ongoing effort. This set of amendments is not directly related to capital improvements. It's really more related to zoning regulations. But to the degree that there is an intersection, we're recommending that those improvements be adapted in the future to deal with sea level rise.
Yeah, I understand this isn't the right forum to talk about the roads, but since they are intertwined very deeply, and there hasn't been a lot of information coming from the county with regards to this or the state. So maybe we'll be hearing about something soon. Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. I have two quick questions. One, there was this proposed amendment to be able to raise your house 5 feet to 30 feet. Would that 5 feet or some factor apply to an accessory unit as well, which has a 15-foot height limit currently?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. And I do want to kind of point your attention to what I think are probably the two most important elements of this. So what we've done is go through the LCP from start to finish and try to uncover where the LCP makes it difficult for people to raise their homes above either the flood elevation set by FEMA or the future flood elevation that we project for sea level rise. And there's a number of different places where that comes up, more than you would think, actually. So like Kristen mentioned, in general, the standard throughout the coastal zone is a maximum height of 25 feet. So with respect to that, we've said, if you are affected by these mapped areas, then instead of having to go through a variance or a design review or a coastal permit, whatever it is, a process to go from above that 25-foot height limit, we'll give you an extra 5 feet, right? To address, the 3.3 feet plus a little bit of extra. Now, we understand that for some people, that's going to have, an effect on their views potentially. But we're hoping that people understand that, their neighbors are trying to protect their homes, and we'll give them a little bit of extra room there to be able to do that. We have other areas too. So if you can imagine those houses on stilts out in Tomales Bay, for example, those are within the permitting jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission. But right now, it's very difficult to raise those. So we're providing some additional flexibility so people can raise those to deal with sea level rise in the future. Same thing in Seadrift, for example. Seadrift has standards for the maximum height of the roof. We're leaving those alone, but it also has standards for the maximum height of the finished floor, which, nobody, if you're looking at a house, what you care about is how big the house is overall. Nobody cares about what the maximum height of the finished floor is. It doesn't make any sense, right? But what it does mean is people have to come in and get variances from us to be able to raise their finished floor, even to meet the FEMA requirements, which is ridiculous. So we've gone through and found those areas where we can give people the flexibility to adapt their own homes and businesses to future sea level rise or even flooding right now. However, as Kristen mentioned, there's a flip side of that. Over the years, we have been sending coastal development permit applications to the Coastal Commission. And whenever they have found that the project was within an area that they anticipate sea level rise will affect it, they have come back to us and said, we want you to impose these, whatever it is, 12 different conditions on that coastal development permit. And those are the conditions that Kristen pointed out. They're the things that say, well, if you do this, you can't armor in the future. You have to record a deed restriction. You can't affect public trust lands. There's a whole series of things, and it's remarkably consistent. If you look at the different transmittals that they've sent back to us, it's exactly the same language. So obviously the Coastal Commission has been through this with their attorneys. They have decided what the language is that they want. And so what I did was take that, cut and paste it, and drop it into the LCP amendments. And like Kristen said, like everybody who looks at these wants to change it around, and I'm sure you will too. And I've kind of resolutely refused to do that because I want to surface for so that you understand exactly what the Coastal Commission has asked us to be able to impose on these individual development projects. And I want that to be crystal clear for you, just so you can see it and make an informed decision. Because I think this is going to be controversial, but at the same time, it is also a negotiating position that I think is going to be important. The Coastal Commission would not continue to ask us to impose these as conditions if they didn't really want them. And so for us to be able to get through some of the flexibility that we want to provide to all of you in terms of raising your homes and doing some of those other things, we think that we're going to need to address this issue. So I want to surface it, get you to take a look at it. I don't know whether or not this is a good enough deal. I really don't. But I do think we have to have this conversation on the local level before we actually submit it to the Coastal Commission. So hopefully you'll be willing to take a look at those and understand what it is that they're saying. And also, please be aware, I mean, some of the flexibility that we're providing people, even if your homes are not affected by these, other people's are. So please, I don't want to just throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're trying to come up with a good negotiating position here. And I think this goes a long way to doing it, but maybe it's not good enough. And I totally respect that if that's what your feelings are.
That's a good answer. You kind of segued into my broader point. So Kevin's mentioned the Tomales Bay and the bulkheads, and I think those bulkheads under those homes probably protect the shoreline better than where there isn't a bulkhead. So in a way, the armoring of the homes in Tomales Bay is actually protecting the infrastructure of the road. And so this is like probably not a fair question to ask you guys because it's more of a Coastal Commission thing, but I think like 65 to 70% of California population, or maybe even counties, like are on the Pacific Ocean, and those people make up, I forget, it's like 80% of like the state's GDP. And I'm just curious, like, is the Coastal Commission dead set on letting all of these houses just fall into disrepair when so much of the state lives there, without any kind of revetments or armoring or protection? Is that like really what they're going to do? And where are those people going to go then?
No, they're not. And it's interesting that you bring up Tomales Bay, because the reason that we have, I mean, even though we don't issue permits for the houses in Tomales Bay, the reason that we put that amendment in there is because the Coastal Commission asked us to. They said, look, I mean, we're because of what is in your LCP, we're having trouble approving these projects, which protect the road and protect the homes and protect the bulkheads. So please change your LCP to allow us to approve these projects. Right, so that's their request. So not to mention the fact that Highway 1 is a scenic highway under the Coastal Act and provides visitors with a way to get to access the coast. And the Coastal Commission, I mean, Kristen didn't get into this too much, but we're also going to be dealing with amendments related to housing in the coastal zone. That's the next set of amendments. And they have not been perhaps as critical as we might normally think that they would be about development projects related to housing. There seems to be a shift. And so I really think, I mean, it's not uniform, but I really think that the Coastal Commission does not want to see these existing communities not be able to survive in the future. Now, sometimes it seems like there's a disconnect between their overall sort of policy intent and when they're actually looking at the code vis-a-vis a particular project. But I think that that's a disconnect. I think the overall policy intent is that they want to maintain these communities that are historic and visitor serving, and provide people with the access to the beach that is really one of the key reasons why the Coastal Act was originally adopted by the state in the first place.
Thank you.
other questions? It's really easy to get into the weeds with this. I think when you start looking at it, it's they're a little bit hard to decide. I mean, we're used to looking at them, but they're a little bit hard to decipher because the codes and policies are reference documents, right? You change one thing here, you need to change it in 6 other places, right? But there are a couple of areas to kind of focus on, and I think at those areas in the code around the height restrictions and the restrictions on armoring the coastline once you've gotten those approvals. I think those are probably key things for you to take a look at. And hopefully you'll understand where we're coming from in terms of this negotiating position that we're trying to set up, and think critically about it. But, also understand that probably nobody's going to get everything that they want out of this process. And what we're trying to do is come up with a fairly narrow set of amendments that has a likelihood of getting adopted and passed. And what we want to have in the future is, as we learn more and know more, to come back over and over again. So this is this set of amendments we're doing right now. Next year, we're going to do a set of amendments related to housing. The following year, we're going to do a general set of amendments. And then after that, we're going to be doing every other year a set of amendments. So as we learn more, whether or not, it's scientifically about sea level rise or what have you, we're going to be amending the codes and the regulations and the policies to address what we know, and hopefully kind of chip away at some of these problems in our approaches with continual improvement, rather than doing a big comprehensive amendment. And hopefully people understand where we're coming from with that, because, honestly, an 8-year-long planning process is not something that we can manage anymore. I mean, I think the days of that are past. Yes.
Yeah, Jeremy, I just wanted to read, this comes back to this whole point of the maintenance of roads. And again, this might be kind of unfair because it's out of your jurisdiction. But just like, I'm not sure exactly what you call this, the amendment number 2 or whatever, coastal hazard response. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read. And I was kind of,
what page is it?
Sorry, page maybe 86. Would that make sense?
Is this the land use plan?
Let me see.
No, I think it's the coastal zoning code.
It's the code. It's
It's
to
the code,
the
yeah.
conditions.
Oh, so yeah, so this is,
Yeah.
so this
And
is, a key section, yes.
Yes, and so it's like coastal hazard response. The permittees are required to remove and or relocate all or a portion of the development authorized by the coastal development permit, and to restore the affected portion of the site if any of the following occur. And then the thing I was kind of honing in on is, there's a number of things, but one of them is B, lack of services. So essential services to the site, e.g. utilities, roads, can no longer feasibly be maintained due to coastal hazards, including due to degradation and or failure of Calle de Arroyo as a viable roadway, and or degradation or failure of utilities serving the site. Marin County and any other provider shall not be required to maintain access and or utility infrastructure to serve the approved development in such circumstances. And so I guess my question is kind of like, are you really seeing this as we have nothing to do with that aspect? It's basically other entities at the county, presumably DPW, is making those decisions as to whether a road is maintainable with sea level rise or whatever other hazard is presented, and then once they deem that road like irreparable, then effectively this clause would come into play, and you'd be telling people you need to at their own cost remove their homes.
So as a reminder, it's not our language, right? It's cut and pasted from what the Coastal Commission told us. So I want to surface what it is that they're saying. Now, in terms of road maintenance, it really widely varies, because the obviously Highway 1 is maintained by the state. There are many roads which are maintained by DPW. There are many roads that are privately maintained. So it just depends on who's maintaining it and whether they maintain it adequately.
So, I mean, sorry, are you saying that in certain situations, if the county decides that it's no longer maintaining a road, like the residents could decide, okay, well, we'll maintain it to a standard that would allow us to maintain these roads and not, trigger this clause?
That's a good question. I mean, in concept, I suppose so. I don't know the legality of maintaining a publicly maintained road. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of that language just sounds obviously, I mean, it's as a utility, it's kind of nice because I could be like, oh, it's really expensive to serve this, this, or to maintain this infrastructure that is otherwise being, threatened by some sort of hazard, like for instance, bluff erosion. And then, but we go through all kinds of efforts to ensure, obviously, that we're still, rerouting all of that infrastructure to maintain service. But anyways, so, I mean, I don't know exactly what my question is, but it all sounds a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it boils down to is what is that threshold that it's no longer able to, that road doesn't provide service anymore. We don't know what that is. And maybe there should be some language about that. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Like I said, everyone who's looked at this language wants to change it. and up till now, I've said no, because I want all of you to be able to see exactly what it says. But I'm hoping that you'll provide comments, because obviously this is a discussion that needs to happen. And when we bring it to the when we bring it to the Planning Commission, this is an area where we want to be able to say, here's what the Coastal Commission has said. We've talked to all these people out in the communities, and here's what they've said. And try to give them enough information to make a wise decision about what to recommend to the board in terms of what to adopt.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know enough about the street codes for DPW too. And is it like essentially what, like we were talking about, that's like effectively a black box to know what is involved and what is that threshold for, okay, no, we need to maintain this road, right? But obviously, if we're thinking about like a Lima Bolinas Road, that's basically the entire thoroughfare to Bolinas. The school sits there. Is that within this category of potential roads that, oh, it's just too expensive for us to maintain this in the face of sea level rise? Because obviously it's right, bullseye of that, flood map and sea level rise map. So it's really hard to kind of, like, to your point of, oh, well, this is, we need to think of this as like, throw them a bone because they're going to allow us to raise houses and stuff, without understanding, what are kind of the roads that are like, okay, no, this is a Lima Bolinas Road is effectively, a scenic road like Highway 1, where, we're not talking about that, and we're going to do things to maintain that infrastructure, as opposed to a small road that is, effectively a residential road that, it's just essentially the resources to maintain that road are not worth the investment. Anyway, so it's really hard to say, yeah, I think that you're right, or not to say that you were even saying this, but yeah, I think that this is a balance, and we're willing to, kind of allow this language to be in there, because it's, counterbalanced with these other things that we would like to kind of go through, without understanding what the implication of that language is on like a road like a Lima Bolinas.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if say it's a road that's maintained by the county, I can't ask DPW, what are you going to do with the road in the future, right? I mean, they're going to say, well, basically, like, there's so many different competing interests for a capital improvement program. What kind of grants are there going to be from the state? You know, I mean, the feds obviously put a ton of money out for the states to do road improvements recently. What effect is that going to have? You know, where are we going to get the money to do this? Like, they're not going to be, I mean, capital improvement programs are, I mean, yes, they're, you know, those programs are set up years in advance sometimes, but they're also set up based on certain assumptions about the funding mechanisms. And they're not going to be able to answer a question about what funding mechanisms they're going to be able to employ to adapt some of these roads in the future. Right. There's just no way for them to know. Hi. Do you know? Yes,
I have
Jenny.
a question, and I don't know if this is anything you can even answer. Is there any in it's from what you've said, this is a plan or a process that's gone back to 2008. Did I hear that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So a lot has happened since 2008. We are right now having this major redo of the Bolinas Y, which is supposed to make a huge difference with the flow of water and prevent certain amount of flooding and deal with the lagoon. Uh, is there any sort of cross conversation between these agencies that look at some of these projects that are being done for, say, habitat restoration or whatever, and how that is going to affect the sea level rise prognosis for Lima Bolinas Road and downtown? I mean, is there any sort of study that's been going on about that? You're coming to us with, boom, this information, and then we can go to another meeting where we hear what's happening with the Y and that drainage. Do you guys talk to each other? I mean, is there something that's going on that actually looks at what's going to happen with some of these projects? What could happen with some of these projects? How does that work?
Yes, we do talk to each other. And so,
That's good.
so the effects of what one agency is working on certainly are taken into account. As I mentioned, those are mostly capital improvement programs. I mean, that's a capital improvement program carried out by the Parks Department rather than the Department of Public Works. Whereas the planning department is really about regulating private real estate development. So there is an overlap. There's certainly intersections, and we are constantly in conversations with our colleagues in other departments about what they're doing and what effect that may have.
So sorry, just as to understand, because you mentioned this a couple of times and it kind of piqued my curiosity, but basically does DPW in the coastal zone need to submit for any coastal permits?
Yes.
Okay, and does that look like it comes through a coastal development permit?
It can either be a coastal development permit that the planning division reviews. It has never made sense to me why we try to regulate ourselves. But as bizarre as it sounds, we are actually acting on behalf of the state. When we are issuing coastal development permits, we are given the authority to do that by the Coastal Commission. And so essentially we're acting on behalf of the state, which is why we're regulating ourselves. But that said, I mean, it's sort of ridiculous. But the Department of Public Works may also need to apply to the Coastal Commission itself, depending on the location. So there are certain areas, like if you're very close to very close to the water, then you may have to go through a coastal development permit process with the Coastal Commission rather than with the county. So yes, they do, and it's both to us and to the Coastal Commission, depending on the location.
Yeah, because I guess I've had limited experience with coastal development permits, but mostly it's not been incredibly pleasant thus far. And I wonder to what extent, because you've really characterize this as, permits that are regulating residential, but obviously as a public utility provider, I mean, they're regulating our, as a small utility provider, they're regulating our projects as well. And I just wonder, to what extent is their capacity? I don't think it's in the, I mean, obviously some of the public infrastructure falls within this hazards. And I, presumably there's other areas where all of this kind of issue comes into play. But if there was the potential within the coastal or within the local coastal plan to more specifically address utilities, it would be helpful. That's obviously just kind of a plug, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's probably a good comment to make. So we do regulate infrastructure development to a certain degree through coastal development permits.
Yes.
So there is an intersection there. It's uncommon, but we do sometimes do that.
Because it seems like, yeah, I mean, at least a couple of the projects that I've been involved with that are more, I mean, as an example, the repair of a bike path, like things that feel like, okay, the coastal development permitting process becomes quite onerous. And, it kind of feels like we're getting pulled into what is ultimately the residential permitting process. And that's, anyway, I don't know, that's kind of why I was wondering, like, what is this process? If you look at what, we're trying to accomplish versus what DPW is trying to accomplish, there's kind of more similarity there where we're doing like these public works projects. And to what extent is the kind of regulatory infrastructure that's overseeing their projects? I mean, maybe I would be, if I knew more about it, I wouldn't be asking for that. I don't really know what their regulatory framework looks like. But if it is a situation where essentially there is, where that framework is less onerous than what we would have to go through, and is there the ability to essentially look at what their regulatory framework is and kind of parallel that for what small utility districts have to deal with or have to contend with anyway.
Yeah, there's no difference.
Okay.
I mean, we regulate BPUD the way we regulate DPW and vice versa, and even Caltrans. Like occasionally Caltrans needs to come to us. So there's no like, I mean, there's some legal frameworks which are slightly different for infrastructure. There's a case out of Southern California, the Bolsa Chica case, which talked about infrastructure development. But that really applies broadly to any kind of infrastructure development. It's not just for DPW or for you or Caltrans or whatever. I mean, so there's some differences, but not many. I mean, it's really pretty much the same across the board. And I don't know if you follow. I'm sure you don't, but I mean, the state regulates itself, and it doesn't get along with itself a lot of times, right? So they don't cut any slack. Coastal Commission does not cut any slack for Caltrans, none.
So bottom line is, regardless of what the development is, whether a resident is proposing it or a public utility, it has to be, how is it consistent with a coastal act? So I think that's the framework.
Yeah. We're getting pretty far into the weeds. Sorry, Jenny.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to grasp all this, and of course it's beyond my wheelhouse. But I'm thinking about the school and say institutions of that kind. Would there be a time when there would be some requirement for the school to move its facility, and where does that information come from? Does that come from you? Does that come, would that come from? Or would that even ever happen? And if it did happen, would there be some ease in permitting that might allow the school to move facilities to a safer place? Because that's right
Well,
there on Loma Bolinas Road where the water.
yeah, yeah. It would not come from zoning restrictions, right? Zoning
So they-
restrictions don't require people to move in that way. Now, it may come because they're affected by some type of environmental hazard. And then they may, because of their own reasons, want to move. In that case, they would be subject to regulation. And these policies and regulations may affect what they would be able to do.
I see. And so there may be, there could possibly be a request for the school to improve facilities there, but for your department to say, no, you really can't do that here now because of sea level rise. Would that be a scenario that we're looking at down the road?
I mean, that it's kind of, I don't know, maybe. But I mean, the
You don't see that.
schools, just like anybody else who owns buildings, are going to have to adapt to changes to the environment in the future. And the regulations that we're proposing to amend may have effects on those, on the ability to do that.
I see. Thanks.
But the code doesn't apply to the school, right? Aren't there different, like a carve out for schools, and they have different school building
Well,
codes?
the building code doesn't, but the LCP does.
The determination to move would probably be up to the school district, based on a number of criteria, like
Yeah.
financing and other
Right.
things.
They would do that. Like, they make that decision, not us.
But sorry, but in terms of the one that I read, I mean, wouldn't there be a scenario where the school or other residents on Lima Bolinas, effectively the county could decide we're not able to maintain Lima Bolinas anymore, and then that would trigger that clause and say that all of those folks need to remove their homes? Am I not understanding what that clause was
No,
saying?
I think that's right. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. I mean, conceptually, that's right. If there were no services, then, and you got a coastal development permit under this requirement, because understand, this is like, if you get a coastal development permit, then this would be imposed on that, right? So if it's existing already, then it's not imposed on that. So whatever the coastal development permit was for, that requirement would be imposed on that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so this is
Yeah.
not like retroactive or anything.
It's not retroactive, no. Other questions?
It's all really
Here.
interesting stuff. um, I don't actually have. I mean, I think there's so many little scenarios beyond Bolinas Road. We're thinking of Wolf Road. One of the, I was just thinking about, talking about DPW and the roads and the mandate from the Coast Commission. Again, I understand this is future permitting, but we have this sort of responsibility to support the visitors and all of that. Um, how are taking the scenario, let's just say DPW says we no longer want to maintain Wharf Road, which is the one that goes to the ocean where people go visit the ocean. And then from that point, anyone who's trying to do anything on those homes, like even if they want to raise their homes, we don't have the infrastructure because the road isn't supported. There's the sewer lines, all that other stuff. Maybe I'm just ignorant to the idea of how, um, where within the county's departments or under like this conversation about our role as a tourist destination, our role as a community supporting for the people outside of Bolinas, where does that come into helping us better understand what types of maybe guardrails that we can put around some of these challenges that we're facing? Is there any insight you could give? I mean, this is all, very helpful for the future understanding, but I'm just trying to think of like, how can we make that connection that it's not just our community members that are impacted, but the thousands upon thousands of visitors that come here, specifically to surf, fish, etc. And where in the county does that impetus or balance get placed against all of these new changes that we have to contend with?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Just to begin with, you said people raise their homes. So I do want to point out some of the language in here which says that these regulations will apply to coastal development permit projects. In other words, if you need a coastal development permit, then it applies. If you don't, then it doesn't. And so typically, improvements to existing structures do not require a coastal development permit. Typically, there are some circumstances where they do, but typically they do not, right? So just leave you with that for a second. But I think you're asking an excellent question, which is like the Coastal Act talks about a number of different things, and one of the most important things it talks about is visitor serving facilities and uses and bringing people to the coast. And that's really kind of all what it's about. Now, for a local community, that's sort of a double-edged sword, right? Because on the one hand, it's sort of like the Tourist Act for California. So you benefit in terms of the protection that it provides, but it's not really for you. It's really for people throughout the state of California, right? But given that, there is, I think, a kind of general understanding that protecting those visitor serving locations is especially important. And so I think that will play into the discussion around what is approved and what is not approved.
Yeah.
And I think it also applies to sort of existing communities. And this is true for, downtown Bolinas, downtown Simpson Beach, downtown Point Reyes Station, Muir Beach, like a whole variety of these different existing. People don't go unless there's something there. Right. And the Coastal Commission understands that. And these conversations are some of the toughest right now. The Coastal Commission itself, not the staff, the Coastal Commission itself is trying to deal with that. In order to protect access, you need to protect the existing towns and villages.
Yeah, and I guess, sorry, it just got me thinking about the narrative that you presented around the bulkheads in Tamales Bay and how that was all coming like to play. And it sounded like they were sort of more, the Coastal Commission, that is, more aware and asking you to even modify language to enable them to do things that they wanted to promote. And I guess I just worry that because all of these kind of coastal access roads in Bolinas are actually county maintained roads, that there isn't sort of that like connection between the Coastal Commission and, they're not going to have those opportunities to be like, oh, wait, what do we need to do here on Wharf Road, where, clearly that is something that happened up in Tamales, where they're, indirectly responsible for the permitting of those homes and presumably are more aware of the implication of the kinds of language that they're, effectively trying to feed into the LCP. So anyway.
Yeah, excellent point. I mean, I think it's not just there. I think it's a broader understanding, but I think they're grappling with it. And it's not clear exactly how to deal with that issue. Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
No, I think that I guess the last little bit I think is just we've spent a lot of time. We've done some traffic study. Well, the civic group's done some traffic studies. We've been counting visitors. We've been looking at financial impact to visitors. I'm trying to really quantify what is the visitor impact, because Bolinas is this little place that you make a left and then you go that way, and we're constantly dealing with the roads, the degradation of the roads due to visitor traffic, whether it's out to Alleyway Falls, etc. So we try to quantify this conversation, and I guess maybe I didn't get the answer I was looking for, and that was sort of around this idea of like, from the county, within the county, is there an area of the county? I know we have some parkland towards the end of Brighton that the parks would be concerned about, but is there an anchor that I could look to within the county that you're aware of that might be a good place to bring some of this knowledge that we've gathered around our impact of visitors and resourcing the visitors that we have? Like, because that's kind of where we're stuck right now, is where do we go with all of this wonderful data about how many people show up here? because I think it helps the longer term conversations about, do we need to build a causeway? You know what I mean? Kind of stuff. And so if there isn't anybody, or if you're not aware, it's totally fine. I get it. But I think it's something that this civic group is sort of determined as this critical piece. We offer up so much, but I don't think anyone really realizes how much we offer up to the visitors, because it's different.
Yeah, I mean, I can see a number of ways that could play in. I think it could play into this effort. I think it could play into housing, and when we're doing the housing amendments as well. Maybe you and Kristen can find a time offline when you can kind of discuss what information you might be able to provide to us. And we might be able to plug that in a number of different ways, actually. So I think it's hard to say without actually seeing what the information is, but I can see a couple of different ways that might be something that we could use.
It's helpful. I think it's just that missing piece that I think that we don't know that hasn't existed before, but we did the work to try to figure it out. So I'd love to talk with you guys about where
Yeah,
we provide
sounds
that.
good. Yeah. What else?
No, it's good
All right.
stuff.
Well, it sounds like you're all going to be busy on the 11th. Hopefully you have a chance to take a look at these, and then I'd love to get some comments. I mean, you don't have to, I mean, if you want to send individual comments, that's perfectly fine. Just, it's all about the ideas as much as where they're coming from. So I really appreciate your time and your effort in looking at these.
Yeah, and I'll do some promotion at actually also to bring these upcoming amendments to the community. I was glad to see a timeline. I think I missed that part. Like, it's going to be a year. There's plenty of time to get it out there and get people, but it is important to know about the 11th and the written feedback. And so we'll promote a little bit of that in our December meeting, and then we have another one in January too. So there's plenty of time.
And sorry, what is the exact date for the written feedback? December what?
We're asking for it by the end of December, because we're just going to put it all together, summarize it, and then sit down in January and figure out what we need to change before bringing it to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Obviously, I mean, the next opportunity will be when we actually publish the Planning Commission review draft. So hopefully you'll be able to take a look at that, but we want to be able to make as much progress as we can right now and get it as close as we possibly can to something that's kind of broadly acceptable before bringing it to the Planning Commission. Anything else?
No, it's been great. For me, it's been great. Lots of really fun scenarios to play out all the details of where we might need to provide some feedback and some comments. So good stuff.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. It's really nice for you to come, and really appreciate you listening to us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you,
the time.
Jeremy and Kristen.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Ready?
Bye all.
Bye.